The following dramatization is based on the book Me and My Shadows by Lorna Luft.
Hello, this is Robert Ackerman. I'm the director of Judy, Garland, Me and My Shadows, and I'm here today with Lorna Luft, who wrote the book and who's the daughter of Judy Garland, and the costume designer, Donna Granata. The movie starts, the first thing we see is a movie theater that also had live vaudeville shows. And I believe, Lorna, that was your grandfather's profession. He owned that theater, didn't he?
He did own that theater. And those are my aunts on the stage. And there's Baby Gum.
There's Baby Gum.
And there's Baby Gum, my mom.
Who became Judy Garland. She was only 2 years old the first time she ever sang on stage.
Correct. She was only 2, and my grandmother played the piano for the silent movies.
And they would do these shows every weekend. The Gum sisters would come out and sing. And this particular evening was Christmas Eve, the first time your mother ever sang.
Right. And she ran out onto the stage. There's been a lot of myths that, my grandmother pushed my mom into show business. But that's a myth. Well, she ran out onto the stage and she started singing Jingle Bells.
Yeah, well, they knew that she was going to do that. They promised her that she could sing that night. She was wearing that costume. One of the myths that persists is that she was actually sitting in your grandmother's mother's lap.
Right.
And that she was holding her, and she got up from her lap and ran up and started to sing Jingle Bells, and they couldn't get her off the stage.
Exactly.
Another myth that your mother perpetuated,
yes,
which wasn't true, I don't think, because your mother had a way of embellishing stories all the time, was that she actually never spoke a single word before that night.
Yeah, that's a little unbelievable if you ever saw the performer that my mother was and how she would tell a story so brilliantly. But she loved to embellish her own life, but she loved to get and tell stories that weren't exactly true. She bent the truth, as they say. But there was always an element of truth, a little bit to it.
Yeah.
And it just got larger and larger and larger as the story got more laughs or more interesting.
Do you remember when we shot this? This little girl was actually only 2.5 years old. And
what I remember more is her audition scene. Her audition scene was so funny because you had left the room and I was there by myself, and her mom came into the room and said, "Are you ready to do this?" And this wonderful little girl decided to sing Jingle Bells with her dress pulled over her head. And I said, she's got to get the part.
But what happened was, I remember when we got to the set that day, that theater, which is in Toronto, everybody on the crew came over to me and they said, "What are you going to do? What are you going to do? This kid, how are you going to get this kid to sing?" And I said, "Well, we'll just let her do whatever she does and we'll film it." And she did it. I kept saying,
did.
"Judy Garland is in the building." She did it.
She did, except for at one point she did stop and demand that she be given Smarties, which are the Canadian version of M&Ms, and that she
stopped everything for the Smarties.
And she wouldn't perform anymore.
Right. And then your mother performed for years on the road till she was about 12 years old.
With her sisters.
This scene is that we're looking at now is her audition for MGM. When she was 12, she was singing constantly on the road with her sisters and doing sometimes 6 shows a day, and really rough life for a little kid.
Right, but my grandmother really, really wanted the Gum sisters to perform because my grandmother really wasn't a great performer herself, so she saw her star in my mom.
Yeah, and she took her to Hollywood because their marriage was pretty bad. Your grandparents' marriage was always kind of off and on. And she took Judy, her name was Frances Gum, but she changed it to Judy. She got that name from a Hoagie Carmichael song that she loved.
Right, and George Jessel was the one who gave my aunts and my mom the last name of Garland. They came off stage, and George Jessel, as the story goes, said, "You're as beautiful as a garland of roses."
Yeah, but I think the real story, I think that's also myth, he said that Gum was just a terrible name.
Well, yes.
And he said, you girls need a better name. And he had a friend of his was the critic Robert Garland in New York, and he just immediately came up with the name Garland and said, the Garland sisters, and from then on they were the Garland sisters.
Right.
But anyway, I just wanted to talk about this because she had auditioned for lots of studios and nobody wanted her.
Right.
And one day she got this call from an agent who really was a big fan and said they want to see you at Metro, MGM. And she had auditioned at MGM before, but with no luck. And your grandfather just pulled her in these clothes that she was wearing. She was a mess. She was outside in the backyard playing with her dog, covered in dirt, and she was certainly not dressed for an audition. And he brought her over to sing for Ida Coverman, the woman who was Louis B. Mayer's assistant. And
who was also very powerful.
Very powerful. And she sang for Roger Edens and for Arthur Freed. And they thought she was great. And they actually brought her back to sing for Louis B. Mayer. But when we made the movie, we condensed it all into one scene.
Exactly.
And he, after singing a lot of songs, he asked her if she sang any opera.
Right.
And then Ida Coverman suggested that she sing this Yiddish song that Louis B. Mayer would like, and she happened to know it.
And
which
she
was
knew
amazing.
it because my grandmother was friendly with a cantor.
Well, also, yeah,
Right.
and so she used to sing at like bar
Exactly.
mitzvahs and Hadassah things
Right.
and all these Jewish things. So she knew a few
She
Jewish
knew the songs.
Yeah. And then when they told her that she was going to sing at MGM, she was so excited and thrilled because she was going to go to school with Mickey Rooney, who she had known from time she was a little girl.
Right, because there was a school in Hollywood called the Meglin School, and they were both Meglin kiddies.
Right. And she also was going to be going to school with Jackie Cooper and all these Hollywood star
children.
kids. Yeah.
Yeah.
But the big problem for her when she finally did get to MGM was that they just didn't know what to do with her because of the way she looked. She was only 4'11", right?
Right, she was 4'11". She was very high-waisted. She had long legs and
And she was overweight.
tiny. Well, she
was chubby.
She was chubby
really
because she was a
chubby.
kid.
Yeah.
And, and also she loved to eat, just like any kid
And
does.
she had crooked teeth. She
Right.
loved eating sweets.
And she loved eating mashed potatoes, too.
And the actress playing Judy Garland, Tammy Blanchard, was none of those things. Donna. She was tall, she was skinny, she was beautiful figure. She was everything that they would have loved at MGM
Exactly.
in those days. So you were given the job of making her look kind of frumpy, and the way Judy Garland's always described in all the books what she looked like in those days.
And how many photographs did you have to work with?
About 2,000.
But how did you get Tammy to look that way? I mean, in this particular scene that we're looking at now, she looks pretty good because this was the first thing we ever shot.
That's right.
And we weren't exactly sure how to make her look frumpy yet. This was actually the very first shot we did of the movie. There was one before of Judy Davis's legs that never made it into the film.
Right.
But this was the first scene we ever filmed.
Yeah, and this, actually, she's in a bodysuit, and we ended up padding her even more. We gave her about 20 pounds in this scene.
Uh-huh.
And because she was so thin and tall, we ended up even, putting more padding on her, making, it was a short-waisted bodysuit and all of that. We changed her proportions, and we just gave her more and more as time went on.
And in this scene, she's with Mickey Rooney, and where they're headed is to the Portrait Gallery, which is the place where they used to do all the publicity stills and all that. And she hated
all of the-
going in there.
Because look at the glamorous women.
And they made her feel horrible. They looked at her and said, look at her. What are we going to do with this girl? This costume is actually based on one of the photographs. It's actually
Actual.
a total replica.
And we even put in her little, we humped her back a little bit more
Yeah.
for all of that and
Because
exaggerated
she had
it.
scoliosis, and so she was hunchbacked a little bit. Not hunchbacked, but she was bent over, and they called her hunchback. And they stuck these things in her nose.
This is and this is also one of the scenes that sets up this movie of exactly really what happened to my mom, and really how devastating this must have been for a young person to have things put in your nose and new teeth, and to be told that you're unattractive at that age.
Yeah, which was something that completely haunted her for a long, long time.
For the rest of her life.
She never felt that she was pretty. She never felt that she was attractive enough. She was going to work every day and going to school every day with people like Lana Turner.
And Elizabeth Taylor.
Elizabeth Taylor later, because she was older than Elizabeth Taylor.
Right.
But Betty Grable and Hedy Lamarr and all of these really beautiful,
But just also
beautiful
being at
women.
MGM and seeing what MGM produced, to see those women, to see the mold that MGM molded these women into looking like, was, amazing, and it was also devastating to her.
Yeah, she spent so much time just being so completely unhappy about herself and about the way she looked. It was really something that, as I say, haunted her for the rest of her life. She never felt comfortable with her looks.
And I have to say, this scene is one of my favorite scenes in this whole movie, because it talks about her voice and how her voice really was her whole being. It was her soul, it was her heart, it was everything. She knew that she could sing better than anyone, but she didn't know how she got that voice.
And she was always afraid, she said, that it would be taken away from her. She actually says it in the scene, but it's something that she actually was afraid of and did express to many people, that she was afraid, well, if I don't know how I got this voice, I don't know how I'm going to keep this voice, and will it be taken away from me if it was just a gift? And also, in some ways, it became it was the thing that she was her greatest pride, but in a way, she began to feel that it was the only thing valuable about her, was her voice.
It was also the thing that made everybody money. And she realized that she became a commodity, and she became the breadwinner in her family, and that she became the business instead of the person.
Right, which is what I think was something, again, that haunted her for her whole life. She
Absolutely.
never felt like she was Judy Garland. She always felt like she had to be Judy Garland. There was an identity that was sort of given to her rather than something that she grew into, and Frances Gumm was completely annihilated. John Benjamin Hickey, the actor, is playing Roger Edens. Who is Roger Edens?
Roger Edens truly became my mom's. He was, I guess you would call Roger.
By the way, I'm
Yes.
sorry to interrupt you, but this actually happened.
Yes, it did.
It was actually some dumb critic said this corny thing of these people standing outside watching her sing.
Would have never
was
happened.
Not true. They said, "Oh, an old Hollywood cliche," but this is actually taken from true accounts.
Yes.
That when she would be rehearsing, they would be
People would gather
around under the window and be
And
completely
applaud
bowled over
by that voice.
Because I added this scene. It wasn't even in the script, and I added it based on the research that I did of MGM at that time. But I'm sorry, I interrupted you.
That's all right.
You were talking about Roger Edens.
Roger Edens was an extraordinary man, and he was one of the music supervisors at MGM, but he really became my mother's mentor, and he became her best friend, and he became a father figure, a brother figure. He was the only person that she trusted her whole life, that she knew that he truly loved her for her, and that it didn't matter if she was working, if she wasn't working, that he would just go on loving her. And he truly, truly did. And he was her
worked with
best
her
friend.
right up until A Star is Born. He
Absolutely.
did the Palace Theater. He wrote all the specialty material
right.
for that, didn't he?
He wrote all of her special material. He wrote everything that...
He wrote Born in a Trunk.
Yes, he did.
Yeah, he didn't get credit for it, but he
Right.
wrote Born
He
in a
wrote
Trunk.
Born in a Trunk, but he also wrote Dear Mr. Gable.
Yeah.
And he wrote The Palace, the song The Palace. He wrote all of her special material, but he knew her so well, and he knew her voice, and he knew that, as John Benjamin Hickey says, just be yourself, because he taught her how to truly be herself in her voice, because my grandmother had said, sing like Sophie Tucker and sing loud.
Like Ethel Merman, sing loud,
right,
belt
sing
it
loud.
Out. Yeah.
And Roger said, just be yourself.
Yeah. And that one of the reasons, one of the ways we expressed that in the movie was that I kept asking him to call her Frances.
Yes.
So he calls her Frances through her whole life.
Didn't
which
really
I don't
happen.
think really happened. No, I think at
Nobody
some
called her
point,
Frances.
Nobody called her Frances at a certain point. But we took that because he gave her a present of a little piano, a toy piano, that she used to keep her, like,
her caps,
her teeth caps and stuff. And on it says, to Mrs. Gumb's baby daughter Frances.
Right.
So we just assumed, well, at some point he called her Frances, and I just encouraged him to call her Frances throughout the whole movie.
Yeah, it's also artistic license, and it also shows how close they were and how much she respected him and loved him.
This scene, by the way, I think looks like something out of a total melodrama. You never think this could possibly be real, but it is real.
Yes, it is.
She was actually singing in on a radio program when the news came over the phone that her father was taken to the hospital and was dying,
right.
and she had to keep singing. Actually, in reality, though, I don't know if you know this, but it was her mother who was with her.
Yes, I do know that.
Yeah, her mother was actually at the studio with her.
Right, and her father was with the two girls.
With the two girls, yeah. And
my aunts.
Yeah, and she did actually sing Zing Went the Strings of My Heart, and they did act. So what you're seeing here actually happened.
Yes. And
the only thing that we changed is that her mother is with your grandfather.
Right.
And Roger Edens is with her. He was there too, Roger
yes, he
Edens.
Was.
He wasn't actually playing the piano for her because he was never an accompanist.
He did. He was an accompanist.
Yeah.
He was in the pit of the original show of Girl Crazy for George Gershwin.
No, but I mean for her.
No,
he
but
never
not for
accompanied her.
No, but he was an accompanist.
Yeah.
He did play great piano.
Yeah. And
but my grandfather heard her. He heard her sing.
Well, we don't know that. We would like to think that.
I would like to think that.
Yeah, chances are he didn't. He was pretty unconscious. He had meningitis. It's not specified in the movie what he died of, but he actually died of some form of meningitis very quickly. He always had trouble with his ear.
Right.
And apparently it went into this kind of major infection that probably with penicillin today they could have cured him very easily, but at the time there was no drug that could do that.
Right.
And in the movie, you see she picks up the pillow that was his pillow.
Right.
And in real life, she wouldn't give up that pillow for about a week. She walked around carrying that pillow for a week.
That's right.
She was so attached to her father. I mean, it was devastating to her when her father died, totally devastating.
Well, she always felt that her father was the only one on her side. Mm-hmm. And her father also, there was a very, very close relationship between my mom and my grandfather because she was their last child.
Right.
And unfortunately, my grandmother wasn't the kindest woman and did tell my mother later on in life that she had been a mistake.
Well, and also the man here, Will Gilmore. Will Gilmore was actually... Will Gilmore and your grandmother were having a love affair for a while. He had a wife who died, and they were lovers for quite a long time. And this scene of her leaving on the day that her husband died is, in some accounts, held up to be the truth, and in other accounts they say that she didn't leave. It's not totally clear.
It's not totally clear, but it for dramatic
we felt
license.
it worked well in the movie. We
Yes.
wanted to make the point without making, without going into too much detail about it. And it seemed a very sort of economical way to make the point that she was not that devastated by her husband's death, and she wasn't that close to him, and also that she was having an affair with somebody else.
Right, and how devastated my mom was.
But your mom was totally devastated. And there are accounts that she did actually that day get home from the hospital and go out with Will Gilmore. I keep calling him Frank, but
Frank Gum.
Frank Gum, Will Gilmore. Here they're on the set of Love Finds Andy Hardy. She had done a bunch of movies, and by this time was kind of popular. The public really liked her.
Really liked her a lot. And they liked
loved
the
her.
combination a lot of Mickey
And her.
and Mama.
But still, she had never been in a movie where she had the lead.
Right. She was not what they would call the star of a movie. They both had, done movies together. And interestingly enough, Mickey Rooney and my mom sort of came from the same background of very aggressive parents. They had traveled around in vaudeville, so they had a bond between them that was, apparent in reality for the rest of their lives. And they really understood each other. They were almost the same height, and they really had a great, great friendship. And I think Mama did have a crush on Mickey Rooney for a while, but Mickey Rooney just loved the ladies.
Yeah.
And as we all know, and I think they became they did become awfully good friends.
Yeah. And in this scene, they gave her the book for her 16th birthday, The Wizard of Oz. And they did promise her that she would play Dorothy. The Wizard of Oz was going to be a new kind of musical for them. And they weren't quite sure how to do it. They didn't know whether to do it like an operetta, and they didn't know whether they should do it as a musical comedy. They weren't quite sure what they were going to do with it.
Right,
So
and there were other Oz books around.
Yeah.
L. Frank Baum had written an entire series of Oz books, and this was just one of the Oz books that my mom had read growing up.
My little hunchback is growing up. Shouldn't be allowed.
The interesting thing was that here she was being offered the lead, but she was 16 years old, and Dorothy was supposed to be 7 in the book.
Right.
And so it was a double-edged thing. She was very excited about it and thrilled about it, but also it was, again, she was not being given an opportunity to play somebody who was a leading young woman. And what we're hearing here is that they had decided to go with her, but then the New York office
Correct.
was very frightened because it was going to be such an expensive movie that they decided they would need somebody who was a bigger star as some sort of box office
insurance.
So they went to Shirley Temple. But what happened was she couldn't sing it. And also, 20th Century Fox refused to loan her out.
Right. Which they would do, and what that means is that studios had people under contract, and they would loan them to other studios at certain times if they were available.
Well, what they did is they made a deal with MGM that they could have Shirley Temple if 20th Century Fox could have Clark Gable and Jean Harlow.
Right.
But then Jean Harlow died.
Right.
And she screwed up the whole deal.
Judy! Go away!
Francis, it's me.
Well, she's got great dimples. But you can sing rings around her. And even if you couldn't, Fox wouldn't let her out of her contract. Congratulations. You're Dorothy.
Well, she's no stranger to pet pills.
Donna, tell us, what are those women doing to her?
They're binding her because Judy was very busty, and she had to look, 7 years old here, and she was, 14 at the time?
Yeah, she was almost 16.
Almost 16. And they're
she
actually
liked to say she was 14. She was 16.
They're binding her and flattening her to try to make her look like little Dorothy.
Yeah.
And look childlike.
And what is that mean old doctor doing on the other side of the frame? He's given her pills. This is what happened. They started giving her these amphetamines to keep her energy going and to also get her to lose weight. They were so upset about the fact that she was overweight. So they gave her the
Which
amphetamines.
she truly wasn't overweight for what she was like, but for
a movie star, she was. And here's this amazing image of Tammy Blanchard looking exactly like Dorothy. I mean, it's really so freaky, isn't it? Every time we ever did this, screen this movie in front of a live audience, every time that shot came on, there would be huge applause. Everybody went nuts when they saw Tammy.
And I just remember you yelling, "Look up, look up, look up."
Yeah, I kept telling her, "Look up, look up. You look more like Judy Garland when you look up, look up." There she goes. She's looking up.
Donna, tell how you researched the exact fabrics and all of the incredible work that you did to make these costumes, because you were recreating a movie that is not only a classic, but did this frighten you?
Yeah, I guess it's, you have to just be there with it. So, yeah, we looked at the scale of the fabrics and the gingham and all the rest of it. We had the ruby slippers handmade. Everything was handmade. Scale of the fabrics and the gingham and all the rest of it. We had the ruby slippers handmade. Everything was handmade here.
Including the Tin Man outfit.
Including the Tin Man was made. Yeah, it was all made,
the only thing we couldn't do, which would have been so funny, but we just couldn't do it, is the original suit that Bert Lahr wore. He had a guy on the catwalk up above him that had a fishing wire, and he used to follow poor Bert Lahr around with his fishing wire up on a catwalk, but we couldn't really do that.
He was manipulating the tail.
Right.
Yeah. But we couldn't do that. We didn't have the catwalk.
The
little thing we just saw where he says, "Well, you three dirty hams let that little girl in there." That's a story that Judy Garland told all her life, which apparently wasn't true, but it was a great story, so we put it in the movie. I don't know if it's true or not. The other three guys always denied it.
Right, they always denied it.
They said, "We didn't crowd her out. We didn't crowd her out."
Right. But do you think they would have honestly said that if they did? But also, Victor Fleming had also been the fourth director on this movie. And they had been through so much, because this movie...
Well, actually, at this point, he was the third. There were four, ultimately, because after him, King Vidor came and did the black and white stuff.
Right.
But they had three directors up to that point, and it was George Cukor who actually is responsible for the way she looks, because they were going to make her look blonde and kind of, they actually filmed some of it.
They did.
And it's really bizarre, because she's got this long blonde hair, and they made her look like June Havoc or something.
Yes.
Yeah, and those screen tests we did were all actually archival duplications of all the different looks and the color hair they were trying on her and the styles and all of that. And we got that all from, different research in the library.
When George Cukor came on to the movie, he said, "Get rid of all that stuff and make her look like a little girl." And he said to her, "Just remember you're playing a kid," which was apparently the strongest direction that took her through the whole rest of the movie, even when Victor Fleming came on. And George Cukor was taken off the movie to do Gone with the Wind.
Right.
And then he was fired from Gone with the Wind, and Victor Fleming, who was doing this movie, was taken off this movie to finish Gone with the Wind. And the incredible thing is that Victor Fleming, in 1 year, 1939, directed Gone with the Wind and The Wizard of Oz. I mean, that's pretty amazing.
Amazing. You can just go home and retire on that.
Yeah, absolutely.
But The Wizard of Oz truly put Mama on the map. It really, really did. And she became MGM's star.
Even though it wasn't, it was never a big box office hit.
No.
Not a big box office hit in those days.
Right.
Not on its original release.
Not on its original release, but also 1939 was one of the most incredible years for movie, in the history of movies. And they had a lot of stiff competition. But again, it was just another movie. Nobody realized that it would go on to become, one of the greatest and most beloved movies in the world.
Which was largely due to television. I mean,
Absolutely.
That's what happened. It became such a staple on television.
Absolutely. And nobody ever thought that Over the Rainbow was going to be, Mama's signature song. Again, it was just another song.
Well, originally it was cut from the movie. They thought
tried
the movie
to.
was too long, so
Right.
they cut Over the Rainbow.
They tried to, and they also said that one of the stories I heard was that they didn't feel it was appropriate to have an MGM star singing in a barnyard.
Unbelievable, huh?
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
But they didn't cut it, and it was in the movie, and as history has certainly said, it did become Mama's signature song. But people have asked me over the years, did she know how great the song was? It was just another song, but it was also the way it was directed. It was also the way she sang it.
It's beautifully shot by King Vidor. That sequence is just absolutely beautiful. And then they went on tour. They came to New York. If you've seen the footage of the two of them arriving in New York for their...
There were riots.
There were riots. It's like looking at shots of the Beatles landing in America.
Absolutely.
I mean, people just going nuts. All these teenagers going crazy. But it
they
was
were
really
truly
difficult.
America's sweethearts.
Yeah, truly.
They really were.
But it was really difficult for her. She didn't have the stamina to be doing all of these shows, live performances and touring, and she got through a lot of it by taking pills.
Well, she also had to get through, doing 7-8 shows a day, plus the fact that they were doing shows, they were doing publicity, they were doing photo shoots. I mean, I think
But
Mama...
also, what's not clear in this movie, but it was at one point, but for some reason it got eliminated. I don't remember now. But he would say, next week we have when they sing Good Morning, Good Morning, he says, this song is from our new movie, Babes in Arms, opening here next week. They had already done another movie. They were just churning them out. They had her working nonstop.
Nonstop.
They just kept churning out those movies. Donna, is this, I always meant to ask you, is this a real outfit that she wore
This is
at
real.
the Capitol Theater?
Yes, this is totally, both of them actually. His tie's a little bit off, but her outfit is spot on.
This is, I think, is worth mentioning. It looks so much like it's Grauman's. This is actual archival footage, but all the stuff you see of the handprints and all of that was a set.
Well, it was done on the exact stage that you just saw them do.
Good Morning.
Good Morning, because of time-wise, and we did it about, 1 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
And it was a very small group of people, and I must say, Jim Chrysanthus and yourself, Bob, did an amazing job of putting, this to make it look like exactly like it did at Grauman's.
Well, I think also the Dan Davis, the set designer, did a remarkable job of that. The whole, when it pans across the opening shot, when it pans across all those handprints, it's not real. It's not Grauman's. It's us.
Right.
They actually took a whole section of Grauman's and recreated it and put it on the stage.
Yes.
And that stage is also the same theater that the Gum Sisters were singing in.
That's right.
We used it for all three.
Yes.
We used it for Grauman's Chinese, we used it for the Capitol Theater, and we used it for the theater in Grand Rapids. Yeah.
Yeah. And this was really funny. This was like a Hotel 6.
Yeah,
and
it was
really
a
was.
horrible
It was a
place.
horrible place. And it was a Hotel 6 that Dan Davis got this great Ciro sign and put it up. And when I saw the dailies of this, I said, oh my, because when I was standing outside on the street looking at that, I thought, oh dear, this is not going to look good at all. And boy, did it. It looked great.
It really did. It looked great. And Artie Shaw was a really good friend of your mom's. She had met him backstage. She so loved his music. She came backstage and she told him years before. And he was a really kind of avant-garde, out there guy for his time. He was doing really interesting things in music, and she loved jazz.
Oh yes,
and
she did.
really, really appreciated what he was as a musician.
And
And they became really close friends.
Very, very good friends, because Artie truly loved her talent, and he loved her vocal talent, and he loved the way that she sang, because she sang from her soul. And
he also really opened her up intellectually. He started giving her books and started making her aware of a world outside of show business. I mean, this was a girl who had been brought up.
he was also a great deal older.
Yeah, he was much older than her.
And he'd been married before.
Yeah. He had a very worldly and intellectual perspective,
and he was sophisticated.
Yeah.
He was also really good looking.
But in show business at that time, even for the circles that he traveled in, he was a very educated, really savvy guy. I mean, he was a very bright, intellectual guy, and he really, for the first time, somebody who had been brought up in the confines of show business and tap dancing and singing.
I did
and
feel
acting.
sorry for the poor actor who played Artie Shaw, because we kept flying him back and forth from Montreal.
Yeah, we never knew when he was going to film his scenes. But he really gave Judy Garland something that she had never had before. He really turned her onto a world outside of the studio.
And it was one of her first real big loves.
Well, it became that. It turned into that. But at first it was something else. And he really had a lot to do with her development as a person.
Yeah.
She was very bright, your mom, and very...
and she loved to read.
She loved to read, and she was interested in the world, and she wanted to be more than just a hoofer, and she wanted to be a hoofer singer. She wanted to be a real actress, but nobody would really give her the opportunity, and she was a great actress and a great comedian, but they never really knew how to take advantage of her.
No.
And so when she was formed this friendship with Artie Shaw and actually fell in love with him, the studio went nuts. I mean, in this scene, we see Louis B. Mayer coming to her and telling her she's got to watch herself and not get involved in any kind of scandal with an older guy. And she was warned off, really, in a very strong way. She was told to keep away from him. And she did all sorts of things, sneaking out of the house. And
she did, but I must say, Al Waxman, who plays Louis B. Mayer, was such a wonderful, wonderful choice for this part, because he had the fatherly ability, but he also had the stern, businesslike attitude that Louis B. Mayer did have. And he also had the psychological terror that he used to put into my mom. At
to all
one
the
point,
actors who worked at MGM.
And because he was the boss. And, Mama did like him. She really, in later years, would talk about how much she liked Mr. Mayer, but she was also terrified of him.
She was terrified of him. And after her father died, from all the things that I've been able to glean from all the reading that I've done, your grandmother used the studio as a kind of surrogate father to chastise her and to intimidate her.
Well, it was
Whereas
also...
a mom would say, wait till your father comes home. What your grandmother would say to her is, I'm going to call Mr. Mayer.
That's
I'm going
right.
to call Mr. Mayer. Wait till I tell them at the studio.
She always had that hanging over Mama's head.
So the studio became this place of total anxiety and terror. She was afraid to go there. And so she claims that all the years that she spent at MGM were really scary and frightening and intimidating.
Well, that's sort of true, and that's a myth also. She did love working.
She says she loved Mickey Rooney, that Mickey Rooney was the thing that kept her...
she loved Mickey Rooney.
And
but
she loved working.
Yes, she did. She loved working with the other actors, and she loved working with certain directors. She did not love Busby Berkeley, because Busby Berkeley was truly a horrible man.
That's Busby Berkeley. That we just saw. He was a really tyrannical guy.
Oh, he really, really was. And he was mean, and he used to drill troops in the Army. And he was just, but he was also a genius.
Yeah, he was a genius.
He really was a genius, Busby Berkeley, but he was just really a tyrant to work with. And my mom wasn't the only one who felt that. I don't know anyone who truly liked Busby Berkeley, because he wasn't, he was not very nice.
No, he was a tyrant, and he ran a really tight ship, and he also was under tremendous pressure to get these enormous numbers done in a certain amount of time, and he also had this affinity and, an attraction to really beautiful, long-legged girls.
Right.
And
he was
sure-
always saying something to my mom to make her feel insecure and unattractive.
I'm sure on some level he must have thought she was a great performer, but he must have thought, why do I have to be photographing her?
Right.
Because, she wasn't the kind of actress that he liked to photograph.
No, and he would say that, and she would hear that. And again, that played a huge psychological part on her insecurity.
Yeah, and as she fell more and more in love with Artie Shaw, she had, a lot of competition in that area. There were all of these beautiful women at MGM, and she, in this stage of her life, she was the most insecure about her looks because she was really a young woman at this point.
And they kept trying to change her. They tried to make her into a glamour girl. They would dye her hair. They would do all of these things to try to fit her into the, quote, MGM mold of those glamour girls. And if someone's doing that to you all the time, it plays such psychological havoc with your instability. If you're just not stable to begin with about your looks, all it did was just make it more and more and more of a psychological block about what she looked like. And she really, I always thought that my mother was gorgeous, and I never understood why she never thought.
A lot of people thought she was gorgeous, but she wasn't gorgeous in the conventional sense.
Exactly.
Joseph Mankiewicz, who was a lover of hers as well, and who had a long-term affair with her, always said that he thought that she was absolutely beautiful, that she looked like a creature that had stepped out of the woods or something, like a fawn. She was so vulnerable and beautiful looking, but not in the conventional sense.
Right.
And Artie Shaw went off and married Lana Turner
And
after
never
one
told
date.
anybody. They eloped.
Yeah, they eloped. The marriage only lasted 4 months, but it was devastating to your mom.
Yes, it was.
Oh, my. Judy? What did you do to yourself?
She was really in love with Artie Shaw. She really had planned to marry him herself.
Yeah, she did. And also, again, psychologically, it was Lana Turner who was so beautiful, and it just reinforced everything that the studio had been doing to her. So this was a really awful time in Mama's life because Artie made her feel pretty, Artie made her feel all of the things that she had fought against her whole life at MGM, and this just was devastating to her because it wasn't like he married, some unattractive, girl next door. He married Lana Turner.
Right. And Donna, at this point, she was about 19 years old, 18 years old, and what did you have to do differently to make her look older? I mean, Tammy in real life was 24, but to make her look older than when she was 12.
Well, we changed her body padding again, and we reproportioned her bodysuit. We enhanced her bust line differently. There was a wig change that started in about 1940 for her when they had put her into that, that strawberry blonde color. So we did that. That's mainly what we did. We took some hips off of her.
James Chrysanthus has just joined us, the director of photography. And here's the filming of Girl Crazy, which was directed by Busby Berkeley. And the filming of the actual movie started with this number, I Got Rhythm. And Busby Berkeley turned it into such an extravaganza that he got fired off of the movie immediately. And she almost had a nervous breakdown. She, in fact, had a physical breakdown. He worked her so hard. And the choice was made to go back and forth from color to black and white. And how was that more or less achieved?
Well, I would say 90% of the black and white in the film is black and white, and it has a really lush, silvery quality, which you can see.
That's because we shot it on black and white
Real
film.
black and white. It was plus X.
Uh-huh.
And in fact, this is sort of has amazing fidelity to the original. I think the shock also of going back to the color and seeing what's happening as she goes through the breakdown.
Well, what we try to do in terms of the conceptual aspect of it was to make it, everything in color was what's real. and everything that you see in black and white would have been what they would have shot. So if you were looking at the dailies for that day, you would have seen everything that you see in black and white would be what you would have seen projected on the screen, and every time it goes back to color, it goes back to the reality.
And again, this is such a tribute to Donna's work because, again, this costume, was recreated pretty much absolutely down to the thread of what Mama had really, really worn. And it was just extraordinary, your work in this, and how much detail you paid attention to.
Well, I also had an extraordinary crew. All of that hand beading on that vest and on her costume, there's like thousands of tiny little glass beads and chalk beads on there that really duplicate it. They were all done by hand. The reality of that, what that actual outfit was in the film. Plus, that was our job. We had to really do what was there.
Right.
And in terms of the musical part of it, all of this is being lip-synced to the original tracks. And so all those musicians had to be trained, even though they weren't really playing. They had to be trained to play, to make it look like they were playing what was being played on the track. So they're all professional musicians, and they were all very carefully rehearsed.
And this is, I think, also, every time I have friends that have seen the movie, this is also one of the scenes where I hear gasps in the room because Tammy really did look so much like her.
Yeah.
At this point.
And I think it's also shocking to people to know that Busby Berkeley was as monstrous as he was, and he was. He did drive her to collapse.
Oh, he did. He wasn't a nice man, to say the least. And this scene, I think, is so important because it shows Louis B. Mayer, the business side of him, but it also shows how my grandmother sold my mom down the river.
Well, it doesn't even show it as
bad as it was,
because he said to her originally she has to be back in 6 weeks, and she said she'll be back in 3.
Right.
We'll get her back here to work in 3 weeks.
And he said, and she did at one point say, even if I have to lock her in a closet.
Well, at some point, yeah, he had said, she said what she needs is discipline. Just lock her in a closet.
Mm-hmm.
Those are things that she actually said about your mother.
Yeah.
But after this movie, she did go for the first time, they actually had to shut down production, as far as I know, on a Judy Garland picture. And they also fired the director.
Yeah, she was just truly worked into complete exhaustion. And they didn't, but again, she was the commodity. She wasn't the person. And they didn't care about her physically. They didn't care about what she ate. They didn't care about if she slept. They didn't care anything about her health except for get her back to work. That's all they cared about because they had a studio to run at the expense of her health. And this scene I love because Roger Eden's is, you see the friendship again. And I love the line where Tammy says, I'm just trying to make everybody happy.
Which is what she did. She did try to make everybody happy, and she was so overworked and so under so much pressure. She was a kid, much younger than this, and doing an adult's job, carrying these movies.
Not only a kid and carrying, she was supporting her whole family. And she was supporting everybody else. She was supporting her agent. She was supporting, so many people depended on her for their livelihood. And she was truly the breadwinner. And my mom was so sweet, and she was so nice. And she wasn't diva-like at all. And all she ever thought of was...
Well, she became more of a diva as she got older because the pressure got worse and worse and worse. And
I don't know if it's so much diva is, or was it standing up for herself finally?
Well, that's what I was going to say.
Yeah.
She had to become more of a diva. She had to stand up for herself because they were just working her to death.
They really were.
And we chose to do this kind of montage to get some sort of a transition between the two actresses, Tammy Blanchard and Judy Davis. It's a really hard thing for all of us, I think, and for the people involved who were the cast. to have more than one actor play the same role.
And tell Bob the decision of where to start Judy Davis and end Tammy Blanchard.
Well, the decision was made to start Judy Davis at the time when she met Vincent Minnelli, because it was sort of the beginning of her adult life. And we felt that to go any further with Tammy would have really been intrusive, because to have one actress marry the same actor, Hugh Laurie, who's playing Vincent Minnelli, have her go into the bathroom one night and walk out be somebody else was going to be too absolutely unsettling. So we just thought,
and it must have been a very hard choice for you.
Yeah, it was a very hard decision to make exactly where that break should happen. And there was a time when The Wizard of Oz was going to be Tammy's last scene in the movie. And so a longer period of time,
which I think
was
would have been
go
even
by.
more jarring.
Well, in any case, it was going to be a longer time before you saw Judy Davis. So about 6 years were supposed to have passed. But